Okay there, hello everyone, and welcome to this revision lesson which focuses on League of Nations and the international peace topic as part of AQA GCSE History, Conflict and Tension, 1918 to 1939. This lesson focuses on the diplomacy outside the League, including the Locarno Treaties and the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Okay, so let's have a look at what we mean by diplomacy outside the League of Nations. So the League of Nations is set up, begins meeting in 1920 in Geneva in Switzerland, but we know that it only has 42 countries when it starts off, and it's missing some of the major important European powers at the time, Germany and the Soviet Union, and also, of course, the world's most powerful country, the United States of America. So what do we mean by diplomacy? Well, diplomacy is when disputes are resolved peacefully through talking, mediation, and negotiation. And it's this essential principle to how the League of Nations worked, and faithful to President Wilson's concept of his Wilson's 14 points. So, because there was an absence of some key countries like the USA, Soviet Union, and Germany during the 1920s, it meant that many important international agreements had to take place outside of the League of Nations. So what we're going to look at today in this presentation is the Washington Naval Conference, which took place from November 21 to February 1922. The Treaty of Rapallo, 16th of April 1922. The Lucano Treaties, the 1st of December 1925. And the Kellogg-Briand Pact, the 27th of August 1928. So let's find out about them. So first up, the Washington Naval Conference. It takes place in Washington in the USA. So it can't be in the League of Nations remit because America's not in the League of Nations. Major countries like Britain, France, and Japan, permanent members of the Council of League of Nations, they attend but representing their own country, not as League of Nations countries. Now, at the conference, it's agreed that Britain and the USA could have the same size navies and Japan's would be slightly less big. So the whole idea of the ratio of 5-5-3, it was called. There's no agreement, however, on the number of submarines, and it's quite interesting in this cartoon that we see here that on the Washington Conference it talks about how they've made the agreement on the boats, but they've not made any agreements on submarines. And of course, submarines are going to be more and more important because they're going to be such an important feature of warfare, naval warfare, into the 20s and 30s. And of course, they were actually really important during the First World War. So this shows that the League is not that powerful because it's not able to get involved in a central aspect of looking at armaments and weapons, and maybe even talk about the idea of disarmament, because it's not got America in it, and therefore it cannot hold any kind of sway or influence over the USA. Next up is the Treaty of Rapallo, and you can see there some meeting between German and Russian representatives. So when Russia left the First World War at the start of 1918, they were forced to sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany, which was quite a harsh treaty on Russia. They lost quite a lot of territory, like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were given to Germany as a result of that. But basically what happened in 1922, representatives from Germany and Russia, they met in a place called Rapallo, which is in Italy, and they signed a treaty. And basically Germany agreed to return the money and land that Russia had lost, and that the two countries would cooperate in the future. The treaty didn't involve the League because neither country was part of it. But it's just significant for you to know that there's a good deal of diplomacy that's going on outside of the League of Nations in the 1920s. Now, by far the most significant treaty that's signed in the 1920s are the Locarno Treaties. Now, a little bit of context to this. In 1923, Germany had announced that it couldn't afford the reparations payments. So France and also Belgian troops actually invaded the industrial area of Germany that was known as the Ruhr. And the idea behind this was that the French and the Belgians would take the reparations in kind by going to the Ruhr industrial region and taking the reparation in the form of coal, iron, steel, etc. Now, that was resolved. A man called Gustav Stresemann had resolved the conflict, and he became foreign minister in Germany in 1924. And the German foreign minister, Gustav Stresemann, had invited the French foreign minister, Aristide-Briand, to meet, and it led to the signing of the Locarno treaties. Now, Locarno is a place in Switzerland, and French and German representatives met at Locarno, and they signed a series of treaties. And within these treaties, the Locarno treaties, actually a series of 7 treaties, they accepted the borders defined by the Treaty of Versailles. And they also agreed with each other that they would settle any disputes that they had peacefully. The treaty is also signed by Britain, Italy, Belgium, and Czechoslovakia. And within the treaties, each country agreed not to go to war with any of the others. And they come up really with this idea of collective security, I suppose, that if any of the countries broke the treaty, they would support the country which was invaded. So the Locarno treaties are highly, highly significant. Now, what Lucano treaties lead to is something that's known at the time as the Spirit of Lacana. Now, what we're seeing here is that these treaties were signed 7 years after the First World War. There's very much a new spirit and a new idea between the different countries. And many people felt that the Locarno treaties were a turning point in international relations, and that they represent this end to German anger and resentment at the Treaty of Versailles, because Germany had signed this treaty voluntarily. It agreed to sign and respect its western borders, which I suppose was a sign in the 1920s that Germany had accepted the Treaty of Versailles. Now, this new sort of sense of understanding between European countries came to be known as the Spirit of Lacana. And within the Spirit of Lacana, Germany joined the League of Nations in 1926. Aristide-Briand and Gustav Stresemann were actually awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1926. But also, it can be seen, this treaty, to be a failure for the League of Nations because they're not involved in it. Because obviously they can't be, because Germany was not a member of the League of Nations in 1925. Now, the Spirit of Locarno can best be summed up by the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Now, the Kellogg-Briand Pact is named after the US Secretary of State, which is the American politician that's in charge of relations with other foreign countries. He was called Frank Kellogg, and Aristide-Briand, who's the French foreign minister. And the Kellogg-Briand Pact very much sums up this idea of the Spirit of Lacana. So what it was, the Kellogg-Briand Pact, is that 65 countries, they met in Paris and they signed this agreement stating that they're not going to use war as a way of solving disputes. So I suppose it reinforces this idea that diplomacy is going to be important for countries to resolve any kind of issues they have. Again, though, because the agreement involved the USA, it took place outside the League. Individual countries were acting independently, and it made the League look like it was simply a place for countries to air their problems rather than genuinely sort out problems, and underpinned, I suppose, the lack of power that the League of Nations had in the 1920s and, of course, into the 1930s. So the Spirit of Lacana would eventually fail. There's a cartoon there talking about the Kellogg-Briand Pact. The signing of the Kellogg-Briand Pact, I suppose, is the peak of the goodwill of international cooperation. And the Spirit of Lacana would eventually fail, partly to do with the Great Depression, but also to do with the rise of sort of nationalist ideas in countries like Japan, Italy, and Germany, combined with the effects of the Great Depression, which led to very much a focus on appeasement from countries like Britain and France when they were having to deal with the aggression of countries like Germany, Japan and Italy, and to an extent the Soviet Union during that time as well. So that was a video about diplomacy outside the League of Nations in the 1920s on the AQA GCSE History, Conflict and Tension course. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.